and welcome to Greenwich University, and thank you, Ollie, for organising this room and all the facilities. So this morning I'm just going to give you a few thoughts on progress, time and attention. Those are the three themes that I'm going to be looking at. And I will start with a cartoon I found in Private Eye yesterday, which will say something. Don't really need to explain it. I was looking for another one, in fact, which said there was a couple sitting on the sofa, and one was saying to the other, enjoying a nice evening in with my beloved, and the other one was ticking like on a screen at the other end of the sofa. So this is where things get a bit unreal. And just this week, we had the Duke of Sussex talking at Children's Mental Health Round Table, and he said social media is more addictive than drugs and alcohol, yet it's more dangerous because it's normalized. There are no restrictions on it. Fortnite, which fortunately I don't know about, is created to addict, an addiction to keep you in front of a computer for as long as possible. It's so irresponsible. And so it's really, this is one of the things I want to talk about. It's called the attention economy, which is a phrase you may or may not be familiar with. And my talk's really going to be emphasizing the IT, the information technology aspect, rather than other aspects of technology that I could talk about. Here's another one that I found on the internet yesterday evening. I haven't seen you on social media recently. But what I like about these is that they're kind of reductio ad absurdum of the presence and absence implied by the thing. So I have here for you some reflections from some of the great thinkers of the 20th century. This is a well-known piece from T.S. Eliot, from the Rock Chorus. The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness. Knowledge of speech, but not of silence. Knowledge of words, and ignorance of the word. All our knowledge brings us nearer to ignorance, and all our ignorance brings us nearer to death. But nearness to death is no nearer to God. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? It's a well-known piece, but perhaps the last section is better known than the first. But the other parts are very well worth reflecting on, and I'll come back to this theme a bit later. And also I have a final quotation from T.S. Eliot, which brings us back. Say, knowledge of motion, but not of stillness. Knowledge of speech, but not of silence. Knowledge of the outer, in other words, but not of the inner. Knowledge of the explicit, but not of the implicit. It's a very subtle piece, and this was written in the 1930s. And then we come on to Aldous Huxley. I think we're going to hear more about Aldous Huxley from Jules. And this is his book, Ends and Means, 1941. In the world in which we find ourselves, not technological advance is rapid. Well, God, you think about now. He's rapid in 1941. But without progress in charity, technological advance is useless. Indeed, it is worse than useless. Technological progress has merely provided us with a more efficient means for going backwards. I mean, that is strong stuff. But the point he's making is that there needs to be progress on all fronts, not just progress in technology. And this was something that was observed by Arnold Toynbee, which I call the wisdom gap. This is 1975. Technology gives us material power. The greater our material power, the greater our need for the spiritual insight and virtue to use the power for good and not evil. The morality gap means that since we first became human, we've never been adequate spiritually for handling our material power. Today it is greater than ever. And this, of course, I mean, if you think 40 years on now, 45 years on, this is no less true, even more true than it was in 1975. And so the reason for highlighting this is that we need to reflect and think about the direction that we're going in, and not just sort of rush headlong into the future without looking at these sort of more profound considerations. Albert Schweitzer makes a similar point to Huxley about 3 kinds of progress are significant for culture. Progress in knowledge and technology, that's the most familiar form of progress. Progress in the socialization of humanity, and progress in spirituality. The last is the most important. Technical progress, extension of knowledge, does indeed represent progress, but not in fundamentals. And that's his point, not in fundamentals. The essential thing, and I like this phrase, is that we become more finely and deeply human. Of course, then we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean, to become more finely and deeply human? Now, for me, it's something which has to do with the heart, with wisdom, with compassion, with caring for each other. And the progress that we have can give us new tools to do this. But otherwise, we have to pay attention that we're not getting diverted and distracted from what really matters, from the essentials. Now, just last week, I subscribed to something which is a sort of monthly digest of business tips. This one came in literally 2 or 3 days ago, and I thought it was relevant to our theme. Research consistently shows that the happiest people use their money to buy time. My colleagues and I have conducted correlational, longitudinal and experimental research with nearly 100,000 working adults from all over the world. We consistently find that people who are willing to give up money to gain more free time by, say, working fewer hours or paying to outsource disliked tasks experience more fulfilling social relationships, more satisfying careers, and more joy overall, and they live happier lives. So this again, is, I think, an interesting point worth reflecting on, that time is our most valuable currency, as it were. And as Einstein said, we all have 24 hours of it a day. Nobody has more or less than anyone else. And so I want to talk a little bit more about time. We have this phrase, which I'm sure you're familiar with, being cash rich and time poor. That people are so busy and they're earning great amount of money, but they've got no time. And this comes in a number of different contexts. And so I was reading a book called Ancient Futures a long time ago by Helena Norberg Hodge. And this was a grandmother saying to a younger woman, she said, with all these labor-saving devices you've got now, time-saving devices, you no longer have time to talk to me. So you use these washing machines and all these things to gain time. Then what do you do with the time you gain and the quality of relationships? So this is the quality time, of course, it's kind of another cliche to some extent. And then some of you may know, and if you don't know it, I highly recommend it, a book by Jacob Needleman called Time and the Soul. And it came out quite a number of years ago, but I always find everything of Jacob Needleman is worth reading. And he talks about the soul's time is being, and you find that in silence and stillness and in the timeless. And he contrasts being to doing, and the value that we place on doing rather than being. And then he says that we subject ourselves progressively to accelerating mechanical time. And this where everybody in this room is familiar with this. If you think back 20 years or 30 years to when you were working in a different way, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, then we have created the systems that progressively ramp all this up and accelerate life. And we have this emphasis on speed, immediate gratification, technology as a means of fulfilling desire. And what I find in my educational work is that if young people have qualities to choose and in a box of 7 qualities, and patience is one of these qualities, then about half of them choose, you'd expect 15% statistically, but half of them choose patience as something they need to develop. And so I think that this increased speed of modern technology makes us more impatient because we get used to things immediately coming up. And I'm sure you've all got annoyed with your computers when they started, or a video that starts going round and round, when you expect the thing to load quickly. Although I personally, my broadband in my village in France is quite fast enough. I don't need 5G to make it even faster. And obviously, this can turn into frustration and even rage. And we've talked, our productivity has almost certainly gone up, but it puts far more pressure on the professional people than used to be the case, because you had outsourcing. You even had people in universities had secretaries, and these things that the people are now their own secretary, and they've got to do a huge amount more than they did. And I think one of the things that we can all think about is how much time do we spend doing the urgent stuff, which isn't actually important. And so one needs to think about prioritizing one's day. Pete Russell does this. He says he doesn't open an email before 12 o'clock. And that means that in the time before 12 o'clock, you can really set your own agenda, and you can do what you think is important. And it reminds me of a man who radioed back in an aeroplane. He said, "I'm lost, but I'm making record time." Now, I want to show you this clip from Jennifer Gidley, and just to give you an idea of the background here. Just wait till I get to the bottom here. And we have these two futures. We have the human-centered transhumanism, or the technotopic post-humanism. And if you look at the recent book by Lord Rees, the former president of the Royal Society, he's a post-humanist. He thinks that biological humans are a transitional phase to post-human, which will be a mixture of machine and human. And so this is with the emphasis and huge amounts of research money going into AI, ASI, robotics, genetics, nanotechnology. And interestingly, that the imagination, science fiction, is a driver of all this image, this possible future, with the whole idea of the Übermensch, the Superman, coming from Nietzsche. And then this translates into a mechanistic understanding of the human being. L'Homme Machine by Lamettrie came out in 1749. And the mechanistic metaphor is everywhere, particularly in biology still. And the way of thinking that it corresponds to is control, manipulation, instrumental view of the human being, utility, efficiency, and speed. And thinking is regarded as just processing. And one sort of thinking is processing, but you can't sum up the whole of thinking as just processing. And this leads to, obviously, algorithms, data mining, and a decontextualized logic, symbolic logic, as Jeremy Nadler points out in his book. It is decontextualized. It has no context. And immortality is a disembodied upload of the brain into, this is the vision, this is the Kurzweil vision, as opposed to the spiritual immortality of the soul, and the soul associated with feeling, empathy, and love. And again, if you look at, we're hearing from Ian McGilchrist tomorrow, but broadly speaking, the mechanistic approach is one that is favored by the left hemisphere with analysis and taking things apart. And the right hemisphere would be the one of context, innovation, intuition. And so these visions you could sum up as either the Ray Kurzweil singularity or the Abraham Maslow / Aldous Huxley humanistic future. So at this point I want to just show you the clip. What do I do, Ollie? It's a 5-minute clip from Jennifer Gidley, who's
the capabilities of the physical body. They're developing the limbs and organs of our evolving human nature. So, in summary, we're at a critical point in research into human futures. Two divergent streams show up in human futures conversations. Which direction we choose will also decide the fate of Earth futures, at least in the sense of Earth's dual role as home for humans and habitat for life in general. So I have a little sort of distillation of what I consider these two extremes to be. Human-centred futures, in my view, is humanitarian, philosophical and ecological. It's based on a view of humans as kind, fair, consciously evolving, peaceful agents of change with a responsibility to maintain the ecological balance between humans, Earth and cosmos. Human-centred futures involve ongoing psychological, socio-cultural, aesthetic and spiritual development, and a commitment to the betterment of earthly conditions for all humanity through not technological enhancement or genetic manipulation, but through education, cultural diversity, greater economic and resource parity, and respect for future generations. Technotopian futures, and I can be called a propagandist of human futures if you like, but I'm unashamedly normative in this respect. What I call technotopian futures is dehumanising, scientistic and atomistic. It is based on a mechanistic behaviourist model of the human being, drawing on the machine, man as machine, and behaviourist psychology and so on, and the thin cybernetic view of intelligence. The transhumanist ambition to create future techno-humans, in my view, is anti-human and anti-evolutionary. Jim Data doesn't agree with me. That's okay. We're a broad church in the World Future Studies Federation. It involves technological, biological and genetic enhancement of humans and artificial and machine intelligence. Some technotopians have transcendental dreams of abandoning Earth to build a fantasised techno-heaven on Mars or in satellite cities in outer space. And some of us have said, like Natalie said, that she had resisted that side of things, and I have as well. I would rather see us attend to the issues we have on Earth than run away from Earth and start all the same things. I'm sure we'd have the same problems on Mars that we have here, unless we solve them here first. So, and Eric, by mentioning the word transcendental dreams, it's a kind of a segue into you. So, a paradoxical ending. Because from a post-formal viewpoint, I can't just say, well, there's either or human futures or techno futures. That would be a binary logic, and I'm not going to be caught in that. So from a post-formal viewpoint, it can't be simply black and white, either or. So it's always mixed, and particularly now in the 21st century, because we've had sort of very invasive technologies for a long time. I'm giving this talk with a microphone, with a computer. You know, I flew here from Australia, etc., etc. But the crucial questions are, who is in charge? Who is in charge? Who is in charge of futures? Is it humans? Is it us? Is it a pluralistic democracy of humans? Is it the oligarchs in Silicon Valley? Is it me or my machine? I saw an example the other day. If you say when your phone is running out of battery, I'm running out of battery, it's too late. It's your phone that's running out of battery, not you. Is it the people or the robots that are in charge? Is it artificial intelligence or is it human wisdom? Because we can't create, I don't think we can create machine wisdom. We might be able to create machine intelligence of some kind, depending how you define intelligence. I think wisdom is for the domain of the humans and the gods, if there are such things. So, thank you.
Okay, so escape. Yeah, before the next one comes up. Yeah, good.
The Harding Academy for your wonderful organisation.
That's exactly an example of what we're talking about. That as soon as you finish one video, the next one loads, and you've got to prevent it from starting up because it assumes that you're going to carry on watching indefinitely. I won't go through this in any detail because we're trying to catch up with time. But just this is my own kind of IT work evolution. I got my first computer in 1984, electric typewriter for the SMN. That's, of course, a museum piece. I only had 6 items of post every day. You remember the days? Then we got our first computer, then the email address, and then the first large phone, and the Amstrad laptop, which was stolen when I was on holiday. And then from the last 10, 15 years, smartphones, tablets, laptops, social media, and 24/7, 365. So you recognize that. And I found this vintage social networking. You can see the forebears of the various things that we now have, Tumblr and Skype, I like this one, the telephone, WordPress, Twitter, Instagram. I thought LinkedIn, of course, was your filing machine, and Pinterest. So it's amazing what you can find. And then I wanted just to say a little bit about James Williams. I tried to get him to speak here. He wrote a very good article in the RSA Journal. And he makes a number of important points by saying that the information overload leads to scarcity of attention and then competition for our attention. So user, we are the product, and our wills are being manipulated by these processes. And so there's an attempt at what we call attentional control. So this is the attention economy. Your attention is captured and monetized. And so what the social media companies that have to do, or those companies in this arena, they have to show how much of your attention they've captured, and therefore how much advertising you can push their way, in order for that to run their business model. And what these large companies are trying to do is to provide you with a life operating system. And life, of course, is more than about operating systems. And the point I wanted to make, and I'll come back to this just in my concluding observations, is that this constant stimulus and addiction and distraction, it takes us out of ourselves all the time. And so our attention is being fragmented, dispersed, dissipated, and we become exhausted. And in a book I wrote on the happiness effect a review I wrote in Happiness Effect by Donna Freitas, I headed it up, I'm liked, therefore I am. And so this is the idea of the Cartesian transformation into self-esteem being something that is given to you by other people rather than coming from the inside. FOMO is fear of missing out, which is one of the things that's played on in order to keep you online. And as a result of this attention situation, we have attention deficit disorder, addiction, and then sleep disorders leading to mental health problems. And then he quotes, this is James Williams, he quotes Rousseau and John Stuart Mill, and I thought I'd just share those with you as well, saying we want to campaign, if you like, for freedom of attention. The most complete authority, says Rousseau, is the one that penetrates the inner man and influences his will as much as his actions, 18th century Rousseau. And then John Stuart Mill from On Liberty, 19th century, the appropriate region of human liberty comprises first the inward domain of consciousness, liberty of thought and feeling. And so that was a fundamental point, I think, to make over 100 years ago. And this, I just thought I'd show you this. This is from the International Futures Forum, and it's something that we use in the International Futures Forum quite a lot. It's the love and fear loop. And so the fear loop is where you get your things are abstracted, you're alienated, you're trying to get things that your control is what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to this sense that in the love loop where there's diversity, there's participation, there's a sense of belonging. But we obviously, if you think about your own life, we alternate between these two loops and are somewhere in between. But it's a very interesting model to use. We've used it in all sorts of contexts with companies and health boards and so on. And so it's just worth reflecting on. And then this is another one that I found. After all our online chats, I'm happy to meet you finally, Split Infinity, to finally meet you in person, me too. And my last two slides are about attention. And I've recently been reading a book of essays by Simone Weil, which I've reviewed for the next issue. And she was an extraordinarily brilliant French philosopher who had lived a short but incredibly intense life. And she talks a lot about attention. And of course, in French, it's attention, which means to attendre is also to wait, but it's related etymologically to entendre, meaning to listen. And so these are important processes of listening and waiting and attending. And I love this. She defines love as intense, pure, disinterested, gratuitous, generous attention. And you can recognize that in yourself and your relationships. But it's a very beautiful, of course, intense is also, intention comes from the same root, the towards. And so my point is that we need to center ourselves in this chaos and turbulence around us. And Eliot talks about the still point of the turning world and the silence and stillness in the rock chorus as well. And we need to think about how we spend our time and where we put our attention, both in terms of quality and quantity. And if you think about it, the quality of attention, the real alpha attention that you have in a day, it's limited. We don't have 10 hours of really quality attention. We've only got maybe 3 or 4 hours if you're good at it. And so we need to think about what we spend that best attentive time on. And that often means, I think, also slowing down and taking time to be on the inner rather than the outer, and balancing inner and outer, and choosing to use technology rather than technology using us. And obviously, as Jennifer Gidley pointed out, we've got a mixed future. But I think the function of the network is to remind us culturally that the inner dimension of life must be taken into account. And I finish with a quote from T.S. Eliot. And he obviously, because he's writing in the 30s, he uses man rather than the human. The task of man is to distinguish within himself the narrower and the larger life, the life that is finite, and it comes from this book on the four quartets, and can never transcend itself, and the infinite life through which he enjoys communion with the immensity and truth of the universe. Can man rise to this spiritual level? On the possibility of his doing so rests all our hope of supplying any meaning or value to life. It's a very profound observation, I think. And just the link at the bottom, we're doing a couple of retreats this year in southwest France. One will be a walk where we will be using the four quartets as our form of meditation. That's in June. And then I'll be doing, Marianne and I will be doing a retreat in October on Mary Magdalene. So if anybody's any interest in either of those, just see me during the conference. Thank you very much.